There's a direct line to food price inflation as well. So it's very clear, Martien, isn't it, what the challenges are surrounding the global food supply chain and food production, climate change, Ukraine conflict right now. What then are the solutions as you see them? How viable are they? What role does innovation play? And is there the political will to build resiliency and capacity in the longer term?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. I mean, what you see is that countries are affected, differently. In different transmission channels. Out there. Some countries are heavily dependent on imports from Ukraine and Russia, are affected differently compared to the whole increase in food prices that you have seen that's affecting all countries. And of course, also a major area of concern is the fertilizer, availability and fertilizer prices, and that actually puts a big question mark out there what's going to happen in the next planting season. The affordability for fertilizer use, which we are tracking at the World Bank, actually is at its lowest point. Compared to the food price crisis in 2007, 2008. So the outlook in that respect is very uncertain. Now, given that there are different transmission channels affecting countries differently, there are no blueprint solutions. Yes. So for that reason, the bank is putting forward a menu of options that we support, and when countries come forward for support. Clearly, there's an affordability dimension, and in that respect, scaling up, social safety nets, preferably in a nutrition-sensitive way, would be one way to go. Then there's, of course, a supply side, the availability side of food security. What can be done to make sure that farmers have the necessary inputs to be ready for the next planting season? Can we think about, smart subsidies, alternatives to fertilizers, better practices, fertilizer use efficiency, etc. Then there's the stability dimension of food security. We need to make sure that trade is not affected, that countries do not put in place adverse trade policies, because we know from the food price crisis in 2007, 2008, that actually that has a very adverse impact on global commodity prices. And then finally, there's a very urgent need to make sure that food systems around the world become more resilient. So what can be done to make sure that the short-term emergency measures also kind of reinforce and are aligned, with the efforts that are needed to build resilience in food systems, because that's increasingly being affected by climate change.